All right. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Workplace Strategy for the Road Ahead. I'm Doug Shapiro, VP of Research and Insights at OFS. I'm also the host of the Imagine a Place podcast. I'll be your host today on this webinar. Today's session will be recorded, so don't worry if you lose connection. Today's a special day. It's actually National Limerick Day. It's a thing, look it up, I swear. So in honor of National Limerick Day, here goes. Into the same room, we will soon resume, but for now, we'll just meet on Zoom. I promise that's the last limerick, but believe it or not, today is also World Facilities Management Day. Again, I swear, it's a thing, look it up. So shout out to all you facilities managers. The struggle is real, but so is the opportunity, and I suppose that's why we're here. So no more holidays, no more limericks, just workplace strategy. I've got three unique perspectives with me today, some excellent minds in the room, the Zoom room. First is Regan Donoghue. Regan, you can wave. She's an experienced workforce strategist. She is a principal of her own firm, SimConsults. She's an excellent synthesizer of information. There's like 1,000 books swirling in her brain. And then we've got Susie Youd with us today. She is the Workplace Experience Manager for Hulu. Hi, Susie. Thank you for being here with your valuable perspective and keeping the great people of Hulu engaged, especially while we've been at home watching so much TV. We've got Molly Prior with us. Molly leads all of our marketing and product efforts at OFS. Thank you, Molly, for making this time. You are always thinking far out into the future to position our company with great products and solutions. Thank you, Molly. So let's get right into it. And I want to start with Reagan. I want to start really high level and just kind of get into the meaning and purpose of place. I know that's probably a shifting thing these days. So Reagan, help us understand the role of place right now.
Oh, well, as you know, in my typical approach to looking at things, I never start in the present. I always go backwards first. And thinking of place and the workplace specifically, you know, how did we get here? How did we sort of sign off on going to one single place, sitting in one single seat, doing, you know, monotonous tasks over and over again? Why did we agree to that? I don't know, because naturally we are more nomadic, more exploratory. In fact, what has truly differentiated humans from the mammals throughout the years is our ability to think more flexibly and to explore and to go out and, you know, find new worlds. And so we started off back in the day as nomads. We would forage for our food. We would hunt for the animals. We'd sleep, you know, we're under the stars. And then someone had this idea of this agricultural revolution. And they said, you know what we should do? We should stay in one place and we should make our own food. We should keep some of these animals and we should domesticate. And I think place started to have more meaning in that moment because people started to take ownership of things. Previously, you kind of carried what you could carry on your back. And then all of a sudden, you know, we started to own farms, we owned, you know, land, we owned animals, and we started to accumulate things. And so it's funny because in this book I was reading, Sapiens, he calls it history's biggest fraud, because he essentially says we gave up all of our freedom. We worked way more hours than we would have looking for food by having to, you know, manage the crops and things. We limited our food we were limited to only certain grains, only certain fruits and vegetables. And on top of that, for the first time ever, disease started to spread. So place started off as, you know, kind of not the best, you know, sort of evolution for us. And we continued to grow from there into our industrial revolution, where again, place was kind of a little bit of a miserable space where people were doing monotonous tasks on and on again. And then the scientific revolution, we started to add in computers. And again, now we are tied to one space, to a computer, and we are laboriously working even more hours, by the way, than we've ever done before. And so place is a very sensitive topic, I think, because I think a lot of people don't feel they have a lot of choice and control over how they live their lives. And so I think that we need to, as we talked earlier, reevaluate what it means to us and what motivates us to come to these places. And so I think there is power in place. I think there is power in creating environments that bring human beings together, where we can use our social learning to grow and to evolve. I think there is power in redesigning the place to maybe outfit us better with our nomadic tendencies, to allow us to perhaps evolve in a way that we could, not have to sit in one specific area all day, either at home or either at work, and create more of a variety. So I think there is power in place, and I'm excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Reagan, because like to me, when I think about place, I think about connection. Like behind me right now, this is the Hulu Seattle office. We built it out just prior to all of the COVID shutdowns. So all of our employees up in the Seattle area haven't actually seen this beautiful new space that we built out for them. And we built it specifically to find new ways to help them connect and to create connections across maybe functions that don't necessarily have, seating adjacencies or reasons to connect. And so I think we as humans in general need connection. And so when I think about the power of place, it's about bringing people together. For me, for example, I think about the times when I fly to LA, where our headquarters is. I'm not in LA, but I go there every once in a while. And when I go and I fly with some of my coworkers, I build much stronger relationships with them just because I'm in the same place with them. I'm having an experience with them as we're traveling. And it's much more like I get to know them in a very different way than I would if we were just sitting in an office together, or very much just sitting separately in our own homes.
Yeah, I love this notion that place can work for you or against you, the way you kind of frame that, Reagan. And I do think there is something kind of special about place being the anchor for shared experiences, as you put, Susie. That's kind of key to place there. So Susie, I want to kind of go back to you and talk about shifts here. One of the shifts that I have heard over and over again is that we are kind of moving away from the word workplace and moving towards workforce. In fact, I saw, Reagan, on your title that you were the workforce strategist, not the workplace strategist. So I think that's right. Interesting. I'd love to kind of explore that shift with you. Does that hit home at all to you, Susie?
Yes and no. I think for me in my career, I've mostly had workplace in my title, and my role has never just been about an office or a place. It's been about people and how we're supporting people and influencing them through physical space. And so I can't say that we've always known how to do that in quite the right way. We haven't always known how to really hone into that. And so we've evolved over the years, but we've thought about mostly what's right in front of us. And so while for years we've been practicing and preaching, flexibility and inclusion and things like that, we haven't necessarily ventured terribly far outside of our own four walls. So fast forward to this past year when the whole idea of place was completely flipped on its head. And suddenly everyone is talking about what we've been saying for years: flexibility, choice, speaking to people's needs. And so our four walls were no longer an option, and that forced us to have to start thinking outside of that box. So with people suddenly forced to work from home, I think there's been this pendulum shift, right? That's gone from one extreme to the other. And I think that's helped us to kind of break out of our normal and to kind of think beyond what we've thought was normal or thought was right. And it's changed our perspective on how workplace influences workforce and vice versa. But this pendulum swing or this disruption has brought a lot more people to the table. And I think that because, this topic of workplace and working from home versus in the office, et cetera, it's suddenly become a lot more relevant to a lot more people. And that's why a lot of people are getting in on the conversation. So it's no longer just workplace teams that are talking about the importance of inclusion when it comes to, remote versus in-person meetings. And it's not just workplace teams that are talking about flexibility in the workplace or neurodiversity, right? It's HR, it's D&I leaders, it's the C-suite. It's a number of different people who are connecting the dots between workforce and the power of place. So I think it's interesting because I feel like it's almost like people are suddenly seeing the value in what my team has been screaming into the ether for years, where at the same time our own perspectives have changed for the better. And so I think the shift is actually really exciting, and I do feel it feels very relevant for me personally, because I think more people are starting to talk about what I love to do. I think now the challenge is, with so many people excited about the topic and with so many different opinions out there, how do companies kind of herd the cats and organize themselves in a way where they can make meaningful change for their employees?
Go ahead, Reagan.
Well, I was going to say, oh, that's funny. It's almost like unmuting is my raising the hand. And I actually do think that the evolution of the workforce strategy goes beyond, I've experienced it from being in the corporate real estate world, where it was seen as like working with HR, trying to determine where the workforce was located. I think it's gone a step further, and it has more of an emotional tie. It has more of a personality tie. And a lot of work that I've done over the past year with clients has been around creating these personas, and who are the different types of personalities, whether it's a specific to a department or a type of person, and how do they work best. And so instead of developing an environment and saying, here's how you're going to work best, here's how you're going to, be successful, it's saying, who are you? Like, how do you get your best work done? What does work best for you? And then again, giving them back that choice and the flexibility to, come and go more throughout environments, and having more of that variety, I think is what's, we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
And Reagan, just to follow up on that, like, I think to that point, I heard this great thought around the show Winnie the Pooh, and how important, and how, that's one of the greatest teams of all time, right? And the dynamics between that team. But when you think about it, from spatial terms, a piglet is gonna, need to be supported a lot different than a tiger. And how do you create these environments? No longer are we going to be in this sea of sameness. You can't put people in this bubble any longer that is just rows of the same types of things and expect people to bring their best selves to that. And so I love that, when thinking about how these different, dynamics that we all bring to the table, we all require different ways of being supported to make us our best. And it feels so refreshing that it feels like for the, I know there were people always, looking at this and researching this, but to your point too, Susie, it feels like it's all, people are so excited about this topic right now, that we're finally going to really look at people for the value that they bring, and how do you get down to that individual level and support them to become their greatest, their greatest asset that they can be to that organization. So I think it's really exciting times.
Yeah, and it's oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really interesting. Hindsight's 2020, right? And so I look back, and it almost seems absurd to me that we would build offices and then shove people who are completely diverse and different, shove them in it and say, here you go, everybody, be your best selves and produce really great work, instead of saying, hey, let us get to know you, and then let us build, an office around you, or a space, or an ecosystem of spaces around you, so you can do your best work. It just seems completely absurd to me that we've been doing it wrong for so many years.
Susie,
and I will say to the Winnie the Pooh thing for Molly, each of those personalities is actually a specific personality type. Piglet's anxiety, Eeyore's depression, Pooh is optimism, like Tigger's like compulsive disorder.
And all super valuable and critical to the team dynamics, and that's what's so cool about that whole show. And it just makes everything seem like you get it. You think about Winnie the Pooh, you're like, I get it. And I get why, the different dynamics that everybody brings, and how it really does create the best team that way.
I think we're all going to have to say our own character at the end of this. Make the whole audience wait for that, though.
Nope.
I got yours pinned, Reagan. I don't know. I got yours pinned. Susie, I would love to know, Reagan referenced personas. And, is that something that you're looking at? Like, are you guys kind of trying to create personas to organize the different approaches, or are you getting even more granular than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is we've noticed that offices, or our portfolio of offices, have different personalities for a very long time. So our Seattle office is a tech office, our San Antonio office is our our customer service function, and then we have ad sales in different parts of the country. And so, you know, sometimes my counterparts and I will come together and commiserate over, you know, kind of the personalities that we're seeing. And so we are thinking about that. I think for us, we're trying to be careful not to stereotype too much, but really kind of dig into what the individual needs are, because even within a persona of an office, you're going to have a variety of different people. You know, you think about people who might have different neurodiversity, and being in an office might be really overwhelming for them versus someone who is just energized by being in the office. And so we're thinking about, you know, how are different teams working and how do they need to work to be optimal, but also how are we speaking at the actual individual level beyond the team? So a little bit of both.
That makes total sense. And, you know, I want to kind of dig into shifts a little bit more. Okay. And one of the shifts in mindset that I had recently was, Reagan, when I hosted you on the Imagine a Place podcast. And at one point you even said, you know what, let's stop calling it an office. Like, that's been around forever. This is something totally new. You know, let's give up on that word. I love this kind of disruption in thinking. And I'm wondering, are we going to embrace disruption at the level that we need to, or do you see this not being enough to really spark the true potential of the workforce?
Well, I actually do think that we need to disrupt our world more than ever. And disruption is part of innovation and growth, because if you think about working out, you have to put tiny stressors on your body for your body to get stronger. And so it sort of talks about like how disruption creates, you know, stronger beings. And, you know, at the end of the day, we were super fragile when this all happened, right? It was like that book that you and I talked about the other day, Anti-Fragile, where if you imagine a box of champagne flutes that are not packaged well, if you drop that box in the ground, they're going to shatter, which is devastating because I love champagne. But, you know, if you go into thinking about resilient, which is what everyone's really focused on right now, and that's sort of like the name of the game, is like, how do we stay resilient and how do we, you know, come back to the office and, you know, get back to where we were, or, you know, get back to our new normal. And everyone's really not pushing themselves hard enough. It's like if you went to the gym and maybe lifted like the 2-pound weights, you know, the baby weights, which, by the way, my 4-year-old thinks he's super buff when he's doing that. I mean, he looks like he's, you know, He-Man. But either way, you're not going to get a lot stronger. You're just going to kind of get a little bit there. You're going to be like a phoenix rising from the ashes. You're going to come back exactly the same. So what I'm really trying to share with everyone and talk to everyone about is this idea of being anti-fragile, and how do we create a space or an environment that, you know, one, if another COVID happens, we're ready for it and we have a new type of design that is prepared. Two, that people are not, you know, psychologically unsafe or scared to come back to, that also can support, as Susie mentioned, the neurodiversities within the workplace, because I work a lot with software engineers and those guys do not like noise and distractions. They really want more of their quiet hub. They collaborate in a completely different way. You know, they collaborate with each other extremely well and they don't bother each other. But if you get a salesperson and a marketing person walking by being super loud, they're going to be very distracted. And then, you know, three, the whole part is that, you know, we've done everything productively working from home. We've been doing fine with remote work. So why would we come to an office? Why would we come to this space? And what would it be? And I really was, you know, pushing the idea, it should almost be like a corporate retreat. It should be like, you know, like a respite space for adults, you know, either to get away from your crazy roommates or your crazy kids, or, you know, if you're just bored working from home and you want to get out and socialize with people. And so it does need to turn into, you know, something that people enjoy and look forward to, versus like, you don't need to be in office every day to be productive. We figured that out. That's why hybrid is evolving to become, I think like 85% of companies are looking at that in some way, shape, or form. So the workplace, you know, where we get this work done, it can evolve to be a point of anti-fragile where it's like Hydra. If you cut its head off, 2 more can grow back and it's going to be stronger. And so people will be drawn to this space if you make it something where they can go and explore, if you make it something where they can go and experiment, if you make it something they can go and learn. And all of a sudden you've got this new environment that people are excited about and they're going to fight for, versus right now we're fighting for them to stay engaged and it's just not working. So I do like the idea of disrupting that. I like disruption very much, but for some companies, it's do it slower at your own pace and maybe try pilot stations and areas and see how that works out, and let the people speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's been interesting from, this side of things and the different RFPs that have been coming across the table. And of course, you see everything from exactly the same as, it's always been, you kind of cringe. You're like, oh man, like you got to, I think, that idea of disruption, it's like, you just really want people to take this as an opportunity, because it is such an opportunity with the disruption that has taken place over the last year to really change the way we think, the way we, think about our employees, and allow them that flexibility too, which plays into that hybrid approach, but then also create spaces that allow for those shifts and those dynamics to take place, because ultimately we're not going to get it 100% right the first time. But that is why you create spaces and help people to foster these places that will allow those shifts and those change to take place as people, do start to come back and engage with the products or engage with the spaces in a different way. So I love that.
Well, and I would also say that like the worst thing that we did back in like Henry Ford days was to create KPIs and these measurements, because the goal was to measure large masses of people and their productivity. And we no longer have to do that in the workplace setting. And so why do we still have these fear-based tactics within the environment? So the process also needs to be adjusted, and it needs to be looked at to sort of support, which there's a part in our brain called the seeking system. And that's the part that pushes us to explore it. It's a part that is looking for, new excitement and things to keep it engaged. And if the seeking system is activated, dopamine's released, people are more excited. They're more, excited about work. They're more engaged that way. So I think it's, overall, it's not just an environment situation, it's also a process. So I think HR needs to get involved with this and be heavily engaged with that as well.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, being kind of like the client, if you will, the shift that I see, or the one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about is if we start working in this world where we're taking more of a hybrid approach, then how does that change the nature of the work that I'm doing? And I've suddenly gone from, hey, I'm providing this space for you, and this is, just what we're doing, and everyone's doing it, to, hey, I'm suddenly a marketer and I have to like entice you to come in, and I have to build spaces like Reagan and Molly were saying, that create the right experiences so that people actually want to come in and can continue to engage them in different ways. And I think that variety piece is the key there, because I've been sitting doing this for so long, and after a while my social capital is depleted and I'm completely unengaged. I need to start changing it up and disrupting it so that I can start feeling a little bit more like myself and connecting with people. And so now I almost feel like I'm in hospitality all of a sudden.
That's
I
pretty
would agree
wild.
with that.
Yeah.
Are you hearing from Hulu employees? Are they coming to you saying like, I want this, I want that, I'm hoping for this? Because I mean, everybody kind of knows like this is their opportunity to witness great change in their workplace. I'm curious to know if that's amped up now.
I don't, not too much. I think some of it is like, there are a lot of people who are really happy working from home. It works for them. And there are some people who are just like clawing their eyes out, trying to like, just please let us back in, because we haven't quite gotten to that point yet. And so it is interesting. You see the gamut. There are a few people, I think at this point, people would just be happy with coming back. Like, for example, I have my tiny little desk set up here, and I'm so used to working with this tiny little desk that the other day I went back into the office and I looked at my, 5 foot by 3 foot, sit to stand desk. And I was like, what a waste of space. Because I'm so used to having this itty bitty postage stamp that I've been working on. And so I think that like, there are a lot of people who are really interested in coming back are taking a little bit more of approach of, at this point, I'm just really just like, anything will be a luxury. Just please let me come back in. So that's more of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where it kind of goes back to that point, that there is really no one size that fits all. And I know that's kind of like an oversaid phrase, but it's very true that you're not going to get, I mean, where I'm at, we have 90% of our people back in the office now. So, I mean, different parts of the country, different organizations are very different. We're working back in the same place. We did kind of disrupt one area, of our facility that we're kind of trying some things out in, which is working great. But it is not going to be, I don't think, all this way or all that way. It's going to kind of land itself in the middle somewhere. But it is just it's just the opportunity and the excitement around, being able to hear people and think differently. It feels like our level in the last year of empathy has just really shot through the roof. And it's like one of those things that I would be a hope of mine is that we carry that. It's like you walk into a meeting with somebody and all of a sudden you really think about how they're feeling, what that looks like and how to engage with them. And you kind of can sense that kind of interaction. And it's like, you want to do that like from an organizational level, like how do, we really get down to that individual level. So not just like person on person in a meeting, but also from, top down or the manager level. And how do we really start to understand our employees and where their, safety is, or how they feel, or if they want to come back or don't want to come back, and how do you work through those dynamics? And it's almost like managers have to be kind of retrained to manage, because with that like shift in that thought of that hybrid approach. And so I can't imagine from, an end user side, like, from your perspective, Susie, how you start to have those conversations and manage those big shifts everybody's talking about. And it's not as easy as like, we should just go into this hybrid approach and everybody gets to decide when and how. And that's bizarre. I can't imagine having to, start to think about that and sit on some of these calls. I mean, it's an exciting time because the conversations are happening, but I think it's going to find its way, somehow in this happy medium where, we kind of get the best of both worlds. But like I said, we're back in, in our spaces, and functioning really fine. And everybody's, I was one of those that was like, get me back in the office. I have 3 little ones, 5, 3, and 1 at home. And I was about to lose my, you know what I mean? About to lose it.
Just say
it. And so I was one of those that was like begging to come back into the office and just to have a little bit of that normalcy back. But you find both, there's such a mix out there right now, but that's that whole empathy level that comes back into play of like, how do we get to that individual level and know how to support and give them the best world for their, for them, individually, so that they can be their best self.
I agree. I think there is going to be this really interesting management challenge that the whole world is about to embrace, which is interesting to see how that goes. I had a note that I wrote down. I just didn't want to let go of a reference you made, Reagan, before kind of adding a little bit more to it. You referenced the book Anti-Fragile. So if anybody on this call or webinar is interested in taking book recommendations from Reagan, you need to have lots of time in your schedule. This book is a hearty read, right? It's not like a sit on your beach chair and kind of hang out read. But
I have it. I could grab it.
I'll tell you, I did get into it a little bit, and I think Reagan's point around resiliency was really interesting. That resilience is not enough, and I think that was one of the things I wanted to touch on, because that was my big epiphany I learned from you, Reagan. Was that resilience just means staying the same, but anti-fragile is getting better and stronger. And so I think that's why we're all kind of connecting like this more often. We're all kind of talking to each other. We're looking for ways to kind of become anti-fragile out of this whole thing.
Well, I married an ex-football player, lineman. He's like 6'7", under 300 now because we've been working out, doing our anti-fragile. But I bet he asked me how much I could bench, knowing we were going to have kids one day. And our son is 75 pounds at the age of 4. And they say, if you can lift a calf from birth, you can lift a cow. So I think that stays true. And so I am very anti-fragile in my strength part by lifting my son, who still likes to be carried upstairs. But, it's something to think about, like the abilities, of us as humans, if we continue to push ourselves, we'll continue to grow, we'll continue to evolve. And think of all the things that we've accomplished that we never imagined were possible before. I mean, it's about this thing of the unknown. And that's the biggest challenge I think people face, is if you see a dark cave and you don't know that there are diamonds inside, you're not going to go in because it's scary. But dang, De Beers certainly did one time, and look at them. So it's things like that. We've got to push ourselves past our comfort zone in some of these areas.
Yeah, I agree. There was something that, Molly, you alluded to when you were speaking around change and how place can adapt. You said we won't get it right the first time. Can you kind of go into that a little bit, what you were alluding to?
Yeah. So, that is the whole premise of it, is that, we aren't going to get it 100% right, and being okay and comfortable in that. And so we've started to really think about, how to create space that can adapt and can change. And so there's these different levels, we talk about in this industry sometimes day one, day two. Well, it's like, what does day one, day two really mean? And it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And so it was like, how do we dive deeper into that? And so, we've been kind of looking at these different shifts that need to be supported, throughout the workplace. And so you have these, we kind of broke it down into 3 categories, thinking about, so you have these personal shifts, and those are, products and spaces that can be adapted and changed on users' demand, and so they have a sense of control of their space. They can create environments with their, teammate next to them, from a safety perspective, or, just being able to control that environment to whatever their, needs may be. And then there's this second tier of this, what we're calling, so that would be like what we would consider the day one, day two. Then there's the day 1, day 30, which would be more of like a neighborhood shift. So as teams change, and so you have these products these environments that support, for different project teams. So if some people would be working together, for one project lead, and then you need to, kind of change up the environment so that, this team can, change to a different group. And those products, a lot of times, or those spaces would need, maybe they could be controlled by the user, but most time you may be bringing in, facility. It could be like non-disruptive to the space. Then there's this third shift, this organizational shift. And this does really speak to we're not going to get it right, 100% of the time. And our companies are going to grow, they're going to change, they're going to expand, we're going to have disruptions. Like, hopefully nothing is quite as severe as what we have had this last year, but it was such a wake-up call that we've got to plan for some of these disruptions. And how do you create these spaces that can then evolve and change with it? So on the organizational level, like the day 1, day 365, that's more when you've been able to sit back, whether that's departmental shifts or that's full organizational shifts. And how do you create these spaces that, again, can shift and change with those types of things? So you see how people use space over time. You understand that things aren't working right. So it's kind of deconstructing those confines that kind of hold us in a stationary environment that can't be, so it's using, not the hard walls necessarily in every situation, but knowing that you want to create, places that can adapt and shift with you. So that's, kind of what we've been looking at on the organizational and team shifts.
And I love that, Molly, by the way, because the whole thing I just was like reading, Doug, on flexibility is the same guy who wrote Sapiens wrote Homo Deus, and he talks about like our future. And apparently, like, our future is not going to be humans over the next 200 years. It's going to be algorithms driving all decisions and change. And so, giving ourselves this time to be more flexible, to try new things, to push ourselves. I think we need to work to beat out that supercomputer, because we do still have the, abilities as, humans with our emotional intelligence and things like that. So we need to create these environments to bring us together so we can innovate faster and harder, because I do not want data to be making my decisions.
Oh, no, I'm with you there. And it's interesting, as we were all forced to kind of work from home, we found out that we're pretty good hackers, right? I mean, we were given a space and we just kind of made it our own. We made it work, right? And I'm wondering, can we take that same mentality, bring it with us back to the workplace, and do something with it there? I'm curious, Susie, if you've got kind of a perspective on that kind of idea of empowering people with their space a little bit more?
Yeah. When you say that, the hacker skill, I immediately think of my worst nightmare coming in and seeing all these like jerry-rigged things in the office. And I'm like, no, wait, hold on. No, but I think when I think about this past year, I really see people adapting in two different ways. So like the first one is where people they take their current situation and they try to adjust it in a way to match whatever normal they used to have, right? So for example, I mentioned my desk earlier. I bought this, tiny sit to stand desk on Amazon. I've got my 2 monitors, one of which is sitting on a cardboard box that I've cut up so I can put my jungle of cords in. And it's not a perfect setup, but it works, and it mimics the desk setup that I had in the office. So I'm really trying to take like, okay, this is what I'm used to, this is what I know, and let me recreate that. But I think another way that I've seen people adapt is that when they can't reach that normal that they're used to, or maybe it wasn't working, then that's when they really come up with the creative solutions to build a new normal. And I think about people who get treadmill desks, or who go on walking meetings or whatnot, because they're not moving as much working from home. And so they're creating a new normal on their team, like a new cultural normal on their team, where it's okay to be bouncing up and down while you're walking in a meeting, or you're not even on video because you're just on a phone call. And so I think the real question is, what does that adaptation look like when we go back to the office, right? With like thinking about those two different ways that I've seen people adapt. And so for people who kind of adjust their current situation to match an old normal, I think about the level of flexibility that people are used to now. Like, we wear sweatpants every day and people are doing laundry in between meetings. And we've gotten to this point where we're sitting in this pocket of casualness. And so when we go back into the office, what is that going to look like? So are it more casual clothing? Are people going to take more personal phone calls? Are people going to want to sit on more like couches? Or, maybe people are going to go work out during their lunch break and come back sweaty. Maybe we need to start thinking about showers in our offices, so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. But when it comes to the people who kind of can't create the normal that they're used to, and they have to kind of create a new one, that's where I think the real 8-ball is, because people come up with the most creative solutions. And I think that like people have gotten so used to that hacker muscle. That's why I make the comment of like, I'm just like worried I'm going to come into the office and there's going to be like this like plexiglass house built around a desk or something for someone who might be a little more COVID intolerant. And so it's tricky. I think it's really tricky to think about for workplace professionals, like how can we predict those behaviors, and how can we get the feedback that we need to continually iterate to meet people's needs. Because I think when I think about, sorry, and I'm going long here, but like when I think about that hacker skill, I think that it's incredibly individual, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So someone might come up with some creative solution that is annoying or disruptive or even harmful for somebody else. And so I feel like it's incredibly important for people to be able to exercise those muscles, but at the same time, we have to strike a balance, because we want to make sure that people aren't coming up with these creative solutions that are actually making it worse for somebody else, or the experience worse for somebody else. And so I think it's on companies or workplace professionals or what have you to really communicate in the right ways to provide enough space for people to be able to use those hacker skills, but also provide some guidelines or guardrails. If that makes sense.
It makes total sense. I loved your commentary on that. I love the hacker muscle notion also. And this kind of thought around the casualization of work is really interesting to me. And I see it, obviously we see it in our dress. I've even seen it, in the physical environment. And you compare the environments of today to 10 years ago, where we were going for clean and slick, and now we're bringing in, areas of character and interest, and we're bringing in, lighthearted materials and things like that. I feel like, and even like the communication, right? So much business is getting done over text message now, right? That would have never happened, right? I mean, we're sending emojis in our communication, and it's like everything is going more casual, not just the dress. And I kind of think it's interesting. I'm encouraged by it. I like that, but you wonder how far does it go, right? Are we going to wear our Cookie Monster slippers, to work or something,
I have a Hulu onesie that I will not wear to the office, but
of course you do.
But yeah, I think one thing the other thing too with like this idea of casualness that you were kind of like touching on is how much are like some people are really comfortable with that, some people aren't. We've gone from like as you mentioned, like this really polished, your desk is neat and tidy and whatever, to now they're just like tchotchkes everywhere on people's desks, and I can walk up to someone's desk and immediately know a lot of things about them. But to your point, like how far does that go? But not only in like the physical display of what we're doing, but the behaviors that people are showing. And one of the things that I noticed in the beginning of the pandemic was I was suddenly seeing everybody in their homes, and people were still trying to figure out how to do Zoom backgrounds and stuff like that. So I'm like seeing people in their kitchens, in their living room. I'm seeing people sitting on their beds, and I'm like, this is incredibly private and intimate. And I've broken through this barrier that we used to have, and that barrier is no longer there. So what does that look like when we come back to our office? And I suddenly know, like, I know all about the renovations in my coworkers, about like in their house, and just a whole bunch of different things that I wouldn't have before.
I think that's an awesome point and so true, something we can all relate to. I'm going to start to tackle some of the questions that have poured in here. So I'm going to toss some of these out to you guys. Here's one about burnout. Somebody wants to know, how does burnout play into this conversation? Is that something that we're talking about or experiencing here?
Oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I think that, that's a topic that almost all of the clients I've worked with have brought up almost immediately as a serious concern for mental well-being of employees. Actually, I saw on LinkedIn the other day, a company posted for a well-being manager of, requirements being clinical psychology level. So they're essentially adding therapists to the workplace because this mental well-being is becoming kind of a serious issue. And I think what happened to us was our adrenalines went into overdrive the day that COVID hit, right? I mean, it was like scary. We were like, are we going to survive? Are we going to be okay? Don't touch that pole, you could die, right? Don't go to the grocery store. Like, you can't even get like your food or toilet paper because like, things were so serious and so intense. And then like we went into like all the other things that have happened in our world, and I won't go down those paths, but like, let's just say our adrenaline and our like survival mechanisms and our stressors have been at a heightened sense for over a year. And so now things are starting to trickle back to normal. They're starting to like kind of be a little bit better. So what I think is happening is now that our like, stress cycle, like our survival instincts are starting to slow down, our bodies are going, oh, we're just like, we're worn out. And one of the biggest things behind, when you experience something like burnout is if you don't complete a stress cycle. So like if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you either kill him or you get away, and maybe you run to your tribe, and your tribe helps you kill him, and you celebrate. And like essentially at the end of it, it's a biological part that's wired into you to celebrate and finish the cycle. If we don't finish that stress cycle, that's where burnout starts to play a role, and that's where it starts to become a real issue. And that's where it's coming from, this chronic stress that's not ending. And I was actually on a mental endurance panel with my buddy, Sarah Hagen, who's a neuroscientist. And she was saying, we started off with acute stress and now it's turned into chronic stress. And so it's just been getting worse and worse and worse. So I think that what they've also claimed is if you complete a stress cycle once, that's great, but you have to like keep going, because we might have like decades of stress cycles that have never been completed. And so, and also it's not appropriate to fight your coworker if you don't agree with them, or run away from your kid at the park if you're getting annoyed by them. So, either way, the social appropriateness is also requiring us to be a little bit more, rational about it. So there's definitely things we can do to battle that, but that's, I think, going to be like the talk of this next year, once COVID kind of dies off.
That's really interesting. I've never kind of thought about that cycle, and kind of knowing that we're in that cycle is actually pretty valuable information just personally to kind of understand what you're going through. Here's another question. This one's directed towards you, Reagan, but I'd love to hear all of our thoughts on this. Who will be the influencers in the change that you think is coming or will come?
What we're learning is, and I saw that came from my buddy Rajiv. How you doing? We used to work together at Newmark back in the day. He's actually in workforce strategy as well. What we're seeing and what we're experiencing is, a lot of companies are choosing to let the employees truly kind of lead the charge and get involved in the decision, because if you involve them within the process and in the decision-making part, that engages them more in the ultimate change. And if it feels like it's their idea, and if they feel like they have some sort of control over it versus just being told what they're going to do, that voluntold, that's not a popular way of doing it. Again, it also ignites that seeking system of getting people to explore new ideas, getting them to experiment and do test pilots. It's getting them to learn new ways of working together. And what we really recommend is not only having them involved in the process, but to make sure that we're not saying, oh, this is the solution, this is how you're returning, because we've never had such a crazy time like this before. These are unprecedented times, guys. I don't know if you heard about that, but at the end of this, it's really it's really about having the employees have that control, and then having leadership guide through the vision. Having leadership kind of say, here as a company is where we need to be. So it's like you kind of have like the vision from the leadership, and then you have sort of the needs of the team, and then you address the individual needs of each worker and try and kind of build that into a perfect blend, because you can't do it for just one. It can't be just about the employee, and it can't be just about the company, and it can't be just about a team. So.
And then the transparency through that whole process of being, the organization, as they do make shifts and adjustments, being transparent with the employees on what those decisions are and the why behind it. So just so that everybody's informed along the way, so they don't ever feel like they get put in the dark. But yeah, I thought that was very well said, Reagan.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add. I think like one thing that I think about is, like, to what you were saying, Reagan, in getting the people involved, I always think about it as it builds investment, because the more you get involved, the more they start to care a heck of a lot more about what the end product is going to be, which in my mind, there isn't one end product that's going to continue to evolve, but you get them invested in that process, which means you can eventually, hopefully, get even more feedback and more information to help inform decisions.
We had on the podcast, I recently hosted Hillary Green. She is the Director of Change Management for Scotiabank, and she's out of Toronto. Interestingly enough, the Director of Change Management reports to the head of real estate. Good timing, I would say, for that structural setup there. But, what she talked about was a lot of what you're referring to, and how to engage, a larger group of people in the change process. And then she also talked about the importance of role modeling the change that you want to see. If you're in a leadership position, how important that role modeling is. Is change management something that you guys talk about at Hulu? And I'm curious if that's something that you have a position for, or is it something that's kind of baked into what you're doing in workplace experience?
We don't have someone who's specific to change management. I think we're taking a pretty slow approach to things. It's definitely something that I think a lot about on a personal level, because I think that, like, Molly, to your point, the transparency piece is really important. Building, getting other people involved and providing feedback is really important. But like change management to me is really what it comes down to, because when I was talking about this hacker skill and all of these adjustments or these normals that people are trying to find or create, And the best way that you can help people do that is to help guide them through that process and give them, like I said, the space that they need to do that on their own. And so it's kind of a partnership that you have. You want people to have the space to do what's right for them individually, but you want to make sure you have the guardrails so that they're not kind of going in so many different directions. And so when you're change managing, you're kind of holding someone's hand, but they have their other hand where they can kind of be doing what they need to do to make things happen. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but at Hulu, we absolutely care about it. I think we're still trying to figure out what that will look like for us, because we're still trying to figure out what the future looks like.
Yeah, well, it absolutely answers the question. I mean, you're engaged in the conversation, and I love the notion of a partnership, that you're having with your workforce. Here's another question. This is great topics and information, but what are some of the key questions we can begin to ask our clients to kind of help them imagine things differently and help them be more forward thinking in this transition? So are there some key questions that any of you kind of rely on to frame maybe a new conversation around workplace?
I'm laughing because it's usually, help us, what do? We don't know what we're doing. I mean, I really think you've got to make sure that the client, you have to think about their threshold for this change, right? And I actually like to think of it as not change management at all. In fact, my dad, went and got his master's in change management, organizational development when I was in high school. And, so I've been around it for, about 20 years, and I've seen and all of it. But one thing I think that I took away from it in this modern day, especially during this time specifically, is we're not trying to manage it. We're not trying to watch over people. We're really trying to help people transform. And so it's how do we think of it in that way? And so those might be the kind of questions I would lead to, is not how are you going to manage the change of people returning, more about how are you going to look at the future of work? What does that mean for your company? What are your goals as an organization, with this great return? And, one statistic you can share is that not a statistic, but just sort of a powerful statement is there's never been a better time to embrace doing something differently than after a major, organizational shift or a major event has occurred. So people will never be more open to doing something different or trying new things. So it's sort of more of have you thought about this? Because you might not get this type of opportunity for a while. Once you kind of go back, if you go back to the way things were, there's a thing that kicks in called automaticity, and it takes 60 to 90 days, sometimes 120. And once people hit that point in the workplace, whatever you brought them back doing, they might be disgruntled at first, they might be challenged at first, but once they hit that point where it starts to kind of work for them, it's almost impossible to get them out of that.
And it doesn't have to be prescriptive, right? And I feel like that's one of the other things. I think sometimes we're organizations are asking what is everybody else going to do, or what is it? What's that key answer to doing this? And it's so much of it is just, I think, the encouragement around that there is no perfect prescription for everybody, and everybody is a little bit different, and it's the answers lie within your organization and the needs that you have. And to your point, Reagan, on the, what is their threshold? It's working with that individual, organization or team to go, let's figure it out together. It's not going to be prescriptive and the same for every organization that we come across throughout the journey. It's going to look different for everybody.
And Molly, I think you're almost really capturing some of the answers to one of the questions that just popped in here, which was, for Molly, of the 3 new OFS floor plans on U+, what is the most popular so far? And what are the key aspects that the clients are drawn to? I kind of feel like you just went there, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, just exactly what, we were just talking about with, and, Reagan was discussing as well, is that, there is no prescription based. And that's why we did the 3. We wanted to look at kind of 3 different extremes, because depending on the organization, what their, work personas are, what the activities that they're doing, that floor plans, those are just there to kind of meet the 3 extremes. And a lot of organizations are going to fall somewhere in the middle of all 3 of them. It's never going to look the same and that was the whole goal behind it, was to just open that door a little bit more to try to fit into different floor plans, that you could not take the floor plan and go, hey, this is how you should fit into this. It was to let's start conversations around what kind of workforce you have and what you're trying to achieve coming forward, just to start conversations around more areas than anything else. But yeah, it's back to, it's going to look different for everybody, and there is no perfect way to do it for every organization.
Had a really interesting question pop in here. There's so many, there's no way we'll be able to get to all of them, which I apologize for in advance if you did put one in here. But one person said, if there was a perfect piece of technology to aid in designing an anti-fragile physical space, what would that look like, or what would it need to do? Whew.
I'm going to let Susie start with that one. I've got to think about that. Perfect. It has to be technology, because I think it's more of a mindset, in my opinion. I mean, I think the technology would be our brain and our ability to imagine things that we didn't think were possible. And that is actually why we are superior to other species. As I mentioned earlier, our ability to live in the imaginary world. If you think about it, a company is an imaginary place. A brand is something we imagined and we created. Money is imaginary. That piece of paper is something that we agreed upon as a society will count for a lot of stuff, and you can get some pretty awesome things with it. Hint, hint, honey, I would really love a Ferragamo. But just saying, if our mindset can imagine it, I think that we'll be able to do it, because once we start to believe big things and once we start to have faith in that, I think that's the biggest piece to build on this sort of anti-fragile world, is knowing that we can and that it's possible versus thinking, that we can't. And I saw one other comment someone was asking, and I'll answer this quickly, about the KPIs. It's a quick thing. It's just basically the idea is to engage people. And, if you want them to be more excited about work, you want to get them involved more in play versus measuring their success, versus measuring their output. Give them an outcome and make it results oriented, and don't make it like you have to hit all these measurements and I'm going to guide you along the entire way. So 2 things to add, and they kind of go hand in hand.
Yes, I see that. And we may have lost Susie. It appears she's frozen.
I just thought she was trying to be a robot.
She took that, use your brain as the technology thing, like really seriously, right?
I can start speaking for her.
Well, you were actually touching on something that popped up in the chat box a lot here, which is around, have we broken the stigma if I don't physically see you in the office? Are you still working? Are we still battling that stigma? Have we effectively addressed the boundaries of when it's acceptable to sign off? Those are questions. There's 3 or 4 of those questions in the chat box about boundaries. Are we there yet? So, do you think culturally, or are we still navigating?
It's a 2-piece part, right? One of them is managers are doing what they think is best. And again, it's sort of what worked back in the day in the Industrial Revolution and part of the 80s time when you could actually physically see people. Fear is a motivator, by the way. KPIs are a motivator. If you don't do this, you could lose your job as a motivator. Those are all short-term motivators, and you will get someone to do something for you in a short term. It's like telling your kid, if you don't, clean your room, you're not going to get to watch television. It's a motivator in that moment, but it's not a long-term motivator, and it's not an engager. And the reason people are motivated more by fear, and they actually give this analogy of, if you imagine like your seeking system, which is that part of the brain that engages us to play and explore. If you imagine that's the gas pedal in a car and fear is the brakes, if you push on both, the brakes are always going to win. And so fear will always trump our seeking system. And so that's why managers, I think, have led with it, because it will always kind of win over in the short term. Whereas the seeking system, the part about play and the things that engage us, is going to step back a minute, because again, back to our biological mindset back in the day, if you were ostracized from your tribe, you would not survive. So to conform is to survive. And that's sort of what we're seeing at some parts within the working place. And so it's very important, if we're asking people to innovate and to be creative and to do things that we've never done before, you need to help invoke that sense of play. I think, Google has the best idea where they give employees 20% of their, their career. They can choose to go off on a project that's unrelated to the work that they're doing, as long as they can prove a business case and why it makes sense. That is a really cool way to engage employees to do things different and to maybe engage that hacking mindset and get people working in ways that they never have before. Hi, Susie, welcome back.
I can only imagine what my face looked like when it was frozen. But
you're like this.
Yeah, it's great.
It was like a perfect freeze, almost like this is going to be a Keanu Reeves reference, from the movie Speed. When he's on the bus and they nail that repeat scene over and over again.
It's like the pictures I take and send to my brother randomly, where we just make our faces look as awkward as possible. But anyway.
Well, this is a good transition to another question that came up. And Reagan, I think you did kind of address this, but I'd like to hear from you on this too, Susie. We kind of talked about the general notion of work from home, but is there a work from home policy? The idea of having policy that supports culture. Is there a policy that keeps employees engaged, avoids burnout? Are there some tips and tricks there that you have?
My short answer is not yet. It's conversations that are happening, and that's probably one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we're hearing from our employees right now. Like, hello, what's this going to look like? And like I mentioned before, we're kind of taking things very slowly because we're trying to be really, really purposeful. And so our hope and our vision is that at some point we will have something like that, but it just isn't ironed out quite yet. So.
And I think, policies are coming and going. I've seen a lot of different ones, Doug. I will say that the best policy is one that is ever growing and, continuing to learn and not saying these are the rules set in stone. And Microsoft, head of HR and head of their hybrid work policy, sort of future said that. They said, we are in a test phase. We are not making this official yet. We need to try this out. We need to make sure it works for everyone. So I think that's a really important thing and an important mindset to keep during this time.
Yes, and I just dropped in the chat box, just so you all have it, a link to the Imagine a Place podcast, also a link to your episode, Reagan, if people want to hear more of you. And then I've never done this, but I guess here's the first time to do a public invite onto the podcast. So no pressure, Susie, but it would be great to have you on as a guest also in the coming months if you'd agree live here on camera.
I mean, what would you do if I said no? Just kidding. I'd be happy to.
I'd freeze you again.
Verbal agreement.
They're really awkward. Yeah. I'd be happy to. That'd be lovely.
Awesome. Here's we have time for probably one more question or two more questions. Here's one. Can you discuss economic changes in the workplace, employee retention, material cost, project costs? I know materials is something we're tracking in a big way, Molly. The forces of economics are unavoidable at a manufacturer level. I'm sure they're felt everywhere. If any of you would have kind of a gut feel for that, that would be interesting.
I mean,
or we can skip economics.
Here's what I've told my clients, and this is actually a true story. I had a cancer research company. I think, Doug, I mentioned to you back in the day. And I told them, I said, if things cost a lot right now, like, go for the better, nicer products that are going to last longer, because you don't know what's going to happen. So buy fewer things now and buy nicer, because then you have the option to kind of arrange them the way you want. You have the flexibility, and buy things that are not as static, because again, the future of work is still unknown. It's not fully hashed out. So buy things that are flexible, static, and invest in, the common areas the most, because that's why people are going to be coming back. I'm actually curious to see if there will be a shift again, as Susie mentioned, to like more like tiny house nation, like tiny station nation. I don't know. That might be kind of cool. Where like maybe they end up becoming like, Murphy beds on the walls, and people don't actually really, take up a lot of space with things like that. So, but that's been my main recommendation.
I think that's a great answer to that. Without going too deep into economic data or anything, it's just some good, simple advice.
I'll leave you out on that one.
Last question here. So there's an example here of kind of understanding our own bodies and our own clocks and whether we're larks or owls. And I feel like there has been kind of a rising of this, right? I really think this question is hitting on something. We're understanding our body's data better than we ever have before. Will that play a role in the settings and the spaces that we design, or even kind of like how we open up our workplace for people?
That's really interesting. I don't know if I've necessarily thought about this too much. I'm a huge proponent for listening to your body just in general. And I'm a morning person through and through. And I know that I organize my day according to when I can do my best work. And so I tend to have most of my meetings in the afternoon. And I like to do a lot of my project work in the morning because that's where my brain is fresh and it works the best. And so like, what does that look like in like an actual office setting, and how can we support those differences? I think it kind of goes into what we've been talking about all along, of providing variety and providing opportunities for people to choose and make choices that are best for them. Because if you have a diverse group of people that you're supporting, then you need to provide a diverse group of solutions. But what that looks like specifically, I don't know if I can answer, but that's kind of what my brain goes to right away.
I think we need to have the Hulu type office where you have choice and control, right? All of your different, favorite things on there. And actually, this was one that came up with a technology company I worked with about 6 or 7 months ago. And because they had some employees that, their spouse maybe was a doctor and worked a lot of weekends. And so they're like, I'd actually rather work a Saturday and a Sunday. Or, there's certain people that were not comfortable returning to the office. And so they said, are there any off hour options for me? Because I actually work better late at night or super early in the morning. So we actually created some thought starters that they're testing out right now, where we did like a 24-hour space, almost like the Amazon Prime little grocery store that like you swipe a card, you can access like, a tiny little environment. So it's like almost like their own, like easy access off the street type of environment if someone wants to come in on the off hours to kind of support that. But it is important to make sure that it matches up with what your team's needs are and what other people's needs are, because there is this thing of social pollution. And a lot of companies have had to set rules of no emails past 10 p.m., no emails before 5 a.m., because people will actually sometimes feel like, oh, I need to respond, especially if they're now across, time zones and different things. So it's very important for management to play a large role in that, but then also to maybe have spaces and options for people who are looking for like the ultimate level of flexibility. So I think it can kind of go through the policies as well as the place.
And I was going to ask too, this is actually a question that I have is, Susie, how do you control where you can do your work in the morning and have meetings in the afternoon? Do you block your calendars? Like, how do you set that? Because I mean, for me, and I know probably a lot of people, other people, and this goes to the burnout discussion, I think Zoom fatigue and all those different things, is that the only time I really have to do work is on the weekends, because now that we're meeting so often, it feels like Zoom starts at 8 o'clock. It ends sometimes at 5, depends on the day, sometimes 7 o'clock at night. And it's like, so to find that balance is really tough. And maybe this is to your point, Reagan, too, where it's got to be, management has to come in and control some of that. But I find that to be tricky. I know a lot of people that I work with do too. And I didn't know how you kind of find that you can control that, or if you can, or if you guys set some parameters.
Yeah. When I was about to go out on maternity leave a few years ago, I was sitting down with the head of our people team, and who had also recently gone on maternity, and we were just chatting, and she said, you really, when you come back, you need to be very protective of your time. And that, I think that's something that I'd always done, but it kind of struck home with me, because obviously my life was about to change having my first child. And so I've gotten to a place now where like my calendar is my sacred thing. And I block off time. I block off project time, and I try to schedule my time in a way where Friday mornings are like my project work. And then Friday afternoons is like my tie up the week work. And then I have meetings all across the board, because I'm in meetings, right? Like 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours a day. But I think I almost kick myself in the pants when that happens, because that's really on me that's happened. And you know, some people, depending on the type of work that you do, that's more possible for some people to have that much control over your calendar than others. But if someone wants to have a meeting with me, and like, actually, I just have an email sitting in my inbox and someone's like, hey, I need to meet with you by the end of this week or early next, I'm going to have to respond to them and say, we're going to have to push it to the middle of next week because that's just not possible. And, you know, using that level of prioritization.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like, you know, there's a lot of us that have been trying to figure out how to juggle that. And so it's refreshing to hear that, you know, bringing that control back in and not feeling like you have to say yes to everything and yes to every, you know, meeting that comes in and invite to.
and Molly, this is nothing against boys, by the way, Doug, but there's a thing that females have been accused of. It's called the human giver syndrome. And we tend to, it's, you know, part of our nature to take care of our children, take care of our families. And so when someone tries to ask you for things, it's hard to set those boundaries. It's hard to set healthy boundaries is what we like to call them, right? And so it's really about, if you have, you know, sort of control over who you interact with on a regular basis, you can start to kind of, like as Susie said, set those boundaries on a regular basis. And then eventually you train them that they can't access you during that time. But it is hard. I'm like the queen of not doing that.
Well, I want to take this time to say thank you. We'll just make a little transition out of this. Susie, thanks for putting us in your calendar and for keeping this time sacred. Okay. Thank you to Hulu for letting you into this Zoom call. And Reagan, thank you for bringing all your intellect. And Molly, for everything you bring in your experience. I think this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you, guests, for tuning in. I know there was a bunch of questions we couldn't get to, but we're bumping right up against that time where it's time to close out. So if anybody wants to say bye, this is your chance.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. It was a great time and great insights from everyone.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Appreciate it.
See you all.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.